Enjoy this rip from Anil, the greatest scam on earth. And please welcome to the stage, Anil Patel.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have come to the beautiful city of Prague today because I want to make a confession. And my confession is that I, Anil, am a scammer. I know. Hear me out. It happened when I was 7. And when I was 7, I was obsessed with one thing and one thing only. I'm, of course, talking about airplanes. Hey, eyes up here. Thank you. This was the object of my desire. This is what I craved. I so badly wanted a scale model Boeing 747. I needed it. So I surveyed my options. I could buy it, but I had $0. I could steal it and risk doing 7 years of hard time, or I could concoct an elaborate scam. Naturally, I chose the latter. My scam would be threefold. Firstly, I would write to multiple airlines. I would claim I was doing a school project. And here's the kicker, I'd pretend to be 6. Then I prayed. And would you believe it? It fucking worked. Amazing! What fools! In the coming weeks, I'd receive all kinds of swag, stickers, posters, and even one airline would send me my coveted Boeing 747. Now, I know what you're thinking. Don't worry, the airlines, they would be just fine. But I'd cracked the code. Here was my formula. I had an object of desire. I had a target to help me get the object. And then I had a plan to work the target. Now, if you're unfamiliar with scams, let's break it down. Here's how I like to define it. Firstly, it's premeditated. So that means it's planned in advance. It is not spontaneous. Secondly, it's deceptive. So it requires that a victim be tricked or misled. And lastly, the goal is to capture value. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be monetary. As I just showed you, it can be anything of value to someone. Now, there are a lot of different scams out there, and for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to focus on just one, and that's the Ponzi scheme. The reason being, they kind of cause the most widespread damage. They're very easy to spot if you know the signs, and unfortunately, they're going to continue to persist for reasons I'll explain later. Now, if you're unfamiliar with a Ponzi scheme, what it is an investment fraud where there is a high rate of interest promised, but there's no investment. It's just using the money from later investors to pay out the earlier ones. So let me take you on a journey. 4 stories that I have for you, and we're going to start with our good friend Adele Spitzer. So in 1869, Adele Spitzer, after a moderately successful acting career, she returns to her hometown of Munich. Now, she's grown accustomed to a certain kind of lifestyle that she can now ill afford. So she borrows money from a friend. She agrees to pay them back with interest. When she fails to do that, she borrows money from another friend. And then she doubles down and opens her own private bank. Now, Adele's no dummy. She cleans up her act. She starts wearing a cross around her neck. Wear your statement, right? She attends church regularly, and she is going to target poor Christians in the region. She'd be so successful that she would actually drain the liquidity from the surrounding banks. Now, she'd offer 10% returns per month. And when all was said and done, over 30,000 people lost over $500 million adjusted for inflation. So she was actually the first to run a Ponzi scheme on such scale, a full 50 years before Charles Ponzi. Here's a quote from the Glasgow Herald. A year after everything came crashing down, I'll just read a brief part. The venality of the herd of clergy and journalists who accepted her bribes and drank her champagne, although they must have known that it was bought with the savings of the poor. So the benefactors of fraud often know it's fraud, but they say nothing anyway. Moving on to Charles Ponzi. Now, this is an arrest warrant from 1908 for a man named Luigi Zerosi. Zerosi would run his own bank in Montreal. He would offer high rates of return. He would be engaging in fraud. Bank collapses, he flees to Mexico, but where many saw a cautionary tale, one of his employees would see a blueprint. Now, Charles would not go and run his scam just yet. First, he would be arrested in 1908 for check fraud, and again in 1911 for people smuggling. When he does finally register his company, the Securities Exchange Company, or SEC for short, he would promise returns of 50% in 45 to 90 days in his hometown, or where he moved to in Boston. This lady is key to the whole thing. Her name is Lucy. She is Ponzi's bookkeeper. Now, when you deposited money with the Securities Exchange Company, you received a card in the mail from Lucy, and it said, "Thank you for being a customer. We stand by our promise. We look forward to working with you again." This instilled just enough confidence in just enough customers to prevent withdrawals, allowing the scam to continue. Now, if Ponzi's a successful businessman, he needs to look the part. So he goes out and buys this mansion. He also catches a very lucky break. In July of 1920, the Boston Post would publish this article on their front page. The headline reads, "Doubles the money within 3 months." Next day, Ponzi shows up to his office, and he's greeted by this sight. Thousands of people waiting to give him their money. Now, this alley is important for one reason. It's this line on this map in Boston. Ponzi's office is located here, and City Hall is located across the alley. Now, this is important because Ponzi saw himself as a power broker, and he wanted to have a foot in the door in preparation. He's also now flush with cash, and he needs to do something with it. So he goes out and buys a bunch of unrelated companies. Macaroni manufacturing company, construction company, and even his former employee or employer. He's also in the market for a bank because he wants to tap deposits to solve some of his liquidity issues. He sets his sights on the Hanover Trust Company. Now, just a year earlier, he's denied a loan for $2,000. Now he's their largest depositor with $2.7 million, and he's going to use it as leverage. So he threatens to withdraw his funds unless he is sold a controlling stake. The bank relents, Ponzi gets his way, he is now the majority stakeholder. He also does something when he donates to the Boston police. He knows he's going to need them for protection at some point. And he's so successful, he has over 75% of police officers in Boston as his investors. Now, let me just take you through how quickly it all unraveled, which is very common. 24th of July, the article we saw before. 30th of July, officials are balked by Ponzi. 2nd of August, the Post declares him insolvent. And the 13th of August, he's finally arrested. Banks would even start using Ponzi as a verb in their marketing materials. Fun fact, though, this bank actually went under in 2008 for selling risky adjustable rate mortgages, later to be bought by JP Morgan. And our next contestant of the evening is Mr. Bernie Madoff. Now, Bernie Madoff had a lot in common with Spitzer. Both used their previously successful careers to help get customers, Spitzer as an actor, Madoff as the former chairman of the NASDAQ. Spitzer targets the poor, Madoff targets the rich. That tells us that your level of wealth does not make you immune to falling for such a scam. Spitzer targets Christians, Madoff targets Jewish communities. Faith is a very common factor for scammers to use to build trust. Now, this chart is when Madoff investment securities would collapse, and this is also very common. Ponzi schemes often collapse during economic downturns because it only takes a very small amount of withdrawals from depositors for it all to unravel, because it's so highly levered. Now, there were signs. Madoff's case is famous for the comedic failures of regulators. And no one should be more pissed than a man called Harry Markopolos. He was a he was a forensic accountant, and he personally alerted the SEC no fewer than 3 times himself. In 2000, 2001, 2005. He would provide them with the documentation showing it was mathematically impossible for Madoff to achieve the returns he did in such consistency when matched with the volatility of the market. He'd go on to write a book with a very appropriate title called No One Would Listen. I know. Now, everyone's favorite CEO, Mr. Jamie Dimon, he's referred to Bitcoin as a Ponzi scheme. And to be fair, he should know, because he banked Madoff. Imagine being the only thing that Bernie Madoff and Jeffrey Epstein had in common. Fucking hell. Last contestant of the evening, Mr. Sam Bankman-Fried. Now, Sam's operation wasn't a pure Ponzi, but it had many of the same elements, and whether he knew it or not, he was taking or copying Ponzi's playbook to a T, and I will prove it to you. Ponzi picks an inconspicuous-sounding name. Sam does the same. Ponzi buys a mansion. Sam buys a penthouse. Ponzi sets up shop across the road from City Hall. Sam sets up FTX's US parent company across the street from the White House. Ponzi catches a lucky break with this article. Sam gets the cover of Forbes. Ponzi buys a bank, now owned by JP Morgan. Sam buys the Farmington State Bank, which came with a Fed master account. He also brags to the Financial Times that when FTX is big enough, he might buy Goldman Sachs. How cute. Ponzi buys a bunch of unrelated businesses. Sam also goes on a shopping spree. Ponzi donates to the Boston Police. Sam donates to over 40% of Congress. Ponzi has Lucy to calm investors. Sam does it himself via Twitter. So there you go. 4 stories, decades apart, but all with a lot of common threads. So why does this keep happening? In 2007, Christopher Booker wrote this book, The 7 Basic Plots, and in it he outlines the 7 core narratives that all stories follow. Ponzi schemes follow the rags to riches structure. There is a hero, or yet to be. They possess some hidden talent, and they are presented with an opportunity. Unfortunately, though, most Ponzi operators, though they'd like to see themselves as the hero, they are actually in a tragedy. So the title of this talk is called The Greatest Scam on Earth. And the greatest scam on earth is central banking. But hey, it's not my opinion. Let me match with the definition. Okay, is it premeditated? Well, people you don't know, did not elect, meet behind closed doors on a regular basis. Okay. Is it deceptive? Well, this group claims to have exceptional talents and abilities to predict and manage a complex adaptive system, something we know to be impossible. And lastly, to capture value. Well, you tell me, is your money issued by central banks buying you more or less over time? So the scam of central banking, a small group who purport to play the hero, claim to have exceptional talents, and will make good in the end if only we give them enough power. But luckily, you and I now have a tool to protect ourselves and our loved ones. Thank you very much.